also out on Red Reef, there used to be this huge big groper. And I hope nobody ever caught him and killed him, because it would have been a shame. He was so big. He used to sit beside the boat, and as he'd move his flippers, the whole boat would rock. He was so big. But I'd been catching mackerel, and I'd filleted all the mackerel, and I had mackerel skeletons, just the skeleton of it. And I'd hold the skeleton of the mackerel over the side of the boat, and this fish would just sit there and look at me, and he wouldn't touch it. But as soon as I opened my hand to let it go, he would just open his mouth and swallow this huge big mackerel. Now, these mackerel were about the same length as me, so they were really big fish. But he was so beautiful. Gee, I hope nobody ever caught him and killed him, because, gee, it would have been a shame. We went onto this island one day out there that was just full of cats. There was no people on the island. There was nothing on this island, but it was just full of cats. And when they'd see the boat come down, they'd all come down to the edge of the water. So I used to have to lock Bubbles and Squeak up inside, because I didn't want her going out near them. Apparently these cats were put on one of the islands many years ago in case somebody got shipwrecked there, that they could live off the cats. But also on this island around the other side, there was these huge big clamshells, giant clamshells, and they were dead, because I wouldn't take anything that wasn't dead. And I wanted a big clamshell, but none of the boys would come around with me to get a clamshell. So I got in the tinny and I went around the other side, and in a bikini I walked across the mud and I picked up this huge big clamshell and I put it in the boat. But in doing so, I scratched all down the front of me. Instant infection. That wasn't very pretty, but I got my clamshell and I took it back to the boat. Also, we were coming up to Christmas at one stage, and we were out at sea. We weren't going back in, and I thought I needed to get a Christmas tree for my daughter, because I didn't want her to be on the boat without a Christmas tree. So I went into one of the islands, and I broke just a small branch off one of the trees and took it out and set it up. And I had a little bit of tinsel, and then I got some of the alfoil and made little balls on it. But what I also did, and everybody laughed at me, I got some meds and I soaked them in water so they blew up in a big ball, because my daughter didn't know what they were. And then I covered them in glitter things, and I hung them on the Christmas tree for baubles. Everybody laughed at me. We had a young guy, Stu, living on the boat with us for a little while. And at that stage, he was the Australian champion spearfisherman or whatever. Anyway, he had gone spearfishing, and he'd speared a couple of small fish, and he had them on his float line out the back. And, well, anyway, there was this couple of little reef sharks around there, and they ate the fish, but then they come up and attacked him. And he come up the side of the boat, and he's got his wetsuit ripped, and there's blood coming out of him, and he's saying sharks, and I'm screaming, get him in the boat, because I would never get in the water. I have never gotten in the water. I did once, I must admit, We were out on some island out there, and they said, look, Loretta, you really need to snorkel out and see the reef underneath. It's beautiful. So I said, well, you've got to take me into the shore near this island, and I snorkeled out. But as soon as I got out away from the reef and I had to get out to the boat again in the deep water, I was petrified. So I never did it again. I just don't. I've seen what's under there, and I don't get in there with them. I got an agreement. If they don't swim in my bathtub, I won't swim in theirs. We were up near the Hinchinbrook Channel somewhere at one stage, and a cyclone was coming. And we didn't have time to get back right into the harbour where we come from. So we tied ourselves into the bank in the Hinchinbrook Channel and sat out this cyclone there. That was really scary. You could hear the crocodiles roaring on, on the bank and around, and they make a lot of noise. I was always scared that they would climb into the boat. I don't know if they ever could, but it was horrifying for me. And, you'd hear something hit the side of the boat. You wouldn't know whether it was a crocodile or a log coming down, and you hoped that it wasn't going to, pierce a hole in the boat. It was a metal boat anyway, so I think we were pretty safe at that stage. But that was really scary. And I've been in some really big seas. My daughter's half-brother came up and visited at some stage over on the boat, and his girlfriend, which was lovely for my daughter to get to see him. And my mother actually came up to visit, and so did my sister. That was really fun, trying to get my mother off the wharf onto the boat. Oh, not a nice experience. And P's 3 boys came up at one stage and visited, but they were always like a spanner in the works, because for some reason they just really didn't want me around, no matter how nice I was to them. One day when we were being in at the wharf and we were still living on the boat, the boys had been drinking, and one of the guys from one of the other boats was out there, and it was always my job to row the boats in and out, because that was kind of my exercise. And we were down on the pontoon, and P was just about to put his foot on our tinny to get it to go back out onto the other boat. And there was tinnies everywhere tied up, and it was a floating pontoon. And just as he went to step into the boat and he had the hand of my daughter, the other guy decided he was going to help, so he put his foot on the end of the boat or something. And anyway, the boat rocked. P missed the boat, went down between all the boats and went under the water. And of course, my daughter went with him. And when he brought his head up, I'm up there screaming at him, going, T's down there, T's down there. But what I didn't realise, that he knew he was going to go. So he grabbed her hand really tightly and pulled her back up to the surface, because I was horrified. If he didn't have hold of her and she got stuck underneath one of the tinnies in the dark, in the dirty, muddy river, or underneath the pontoon, we would never have found her until it was too late. We were pretty broke, and I rang my mother and said, because I had all my rent going into a bank account down there that was paying my mortgage and all the rest of it. And I remember ringing my mother up and saying, can you transfer, I think it was only $400 or something over out of my account into things. She said, but there's not that much money in there. And I thought, gee, that's weird. I was getting plenty of money, and it should have been paying my payments and the rates and everything that was needed. But she was softening it. So we moved off the boat, and P's eldest son was coming up to live with us. So we moved off the boat and had to rent a house so his son could come and live with us, because he had to be in town and things to go to work, and I went to work. And then my brother had got married. Before I moved to Townsville, he got married, but him and his new wife had a baby, and he wanted to rent my house. He said, I'll kick your tenants out, we're going to move in and live in there. And I hummed and hard. I didn't really want to kick the tenants out, but this was my brother, and that's how I let him move into my house. I kicked the tenants out. Sorriest thing I ever did. And my brother moved in to my house, but he wasn't there for very long, and they moved out because his wife was cranky because I couldn't afford to put a fence around the back, and the dogs were coming in and things. So anyway, he moved out. But when he moved out, he took everything of mine out of the house. He said, you don't want to leave this here for tenants. I'm going to take it and look after it for you. So everything he took out of my house. By this time, also, my sister had fallen pregnant and she needed somewhere to live. So mother said, we'll put your sister in there. So she moved into my house. and she was heavily pregnant. She was single, and she needed somebody to go in for the birth with her. And of course, I put my hand up. So I jumped on a plane from Townsville because my mother said, oh, she's going into labour. So I jumped on a plane and come down, but she didn't go into labour at that stage. And so I flew back to Townsville. I no sooner got back there and I thought, oh, I'll just drive down. So my daughter and I drove down from Townsville, and I no sooner got there when my sister did go in labour, and I took her to the hospital. And when we were on arrival at the hospital, the midwives examined her and said, oh no, you're going to be a while yet. So they went out of the room, and next thing my sister says to me, oh, Rhett, I want to push. So I said, oh, hey, give me a look. So I opened the legs up, and here's the baby's head crown, and the next thing I've got the baby's head in my hands, and I'm screaming at the midwives and that to come in, and they came in to see what the noise was, and I said, the baby's coming, I've got the baby. And then they took over, and her beautiful daughter was born. But that was a beautiful experience. And I got to see the next child of hers born too. But after the birth, I went back to Townsville and continued on making money. And she lived in my house. So I thought my house was being looked after. So I'm back in Townsville now, and I'm looking after this teenage boy of Peas, and my daughter, of course, she was getting a bit older, and she was about 4.5 by this time or something, I don't know. But I'd worked really hard, and I'd decorated the house and bought new furniture and everything in Townsville and things. But then I get this phone call. I'm thinking everything's going fine with my house in Brisbane. Then I get this urgent phone call from my mother. And she said to me, oh, somebody from the bank who I had my house loan with came to see you today. And this was a Friday afternoon. And she said, he's coming back on Monday and he wants to see you. So I didn't know what was wrong. So I jumped in the car again, my daughter and I, and we came back down to Brisbane. And I got there early on the Monday morning on the Sunday night. But anyway, there was this knock on the door early in the morning, and I'm sort of half asleep. He woke me up, so I went out, and they were going to repossess my house because my payments weren't getting paid. But what was happening, my sister needed a new fridge, and she needed a washing machine, and she needed this, and my mother needed something, and my mother had bought a new car with her money. So I was going to lose my house, and my sister wouldn't move out. So I had a bit of a disagreement with her because there was a motorbike sitting in on my brand new carpet of one of her friends and different things, and I was not happy. So anyway, I jumped back in the car and went up to Townsville, and I thought about it for a little while, and my sister wouldn't move out, and that's how I put the place up for sale, and I sold my house.